Michael Gambon's portrayal of Albus Dumbledore throughout the Harry Potter film series has sparked a bit of debate and controversy amongst Harry Potter fans ever since he replaced Richard Harris in Prisoner of Azkaban. But, was he the perfect Dumbledore? In this video, I'll dive into why Gambon's interpretation wasn't just a different take on the beloved character, but the ideal evolution of Dumbledore's character. From his commanding presence to the subtle nuances that brought Dumbledore to life. I'll break down why Gambon was exactly what the series needed, and why Richard Harris wouldn't have made for a good Dumbledore as the series progressed. Now, that was a controversial statement, I know, but before looking to the film portrayals of Dumbledore, I think that it would be really important to actually examine the Dumbledore from the books and try and break down his character. What made him so fascinating, and why there are still Harry Potter fans to this day who are divided over whether he was a good person or not. See, in the books, Albus Dumbledore initially appears as a wise yet eccentric wizard, embodying that whimsical and quirky nature of the wizarding world. I mean, he dresses in strange and outlandishly wizardy clothes. He has a rather prominent sweet tooth, and his idea of a welcome speech for Harry's first ever feast at Hogwarts are the words, "Nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak." He seems poised to fill the role of wise, kindly old mentor in Harry's hero's journey. Now, in the very first chapter of Philosopher's Stone, we learn that he was the only wizard Voldemort ever feared. Now, this is an instrumental setup, as before we know anything about the wizarding world, anything about Voldemort and Harry's journey through that wizarding world, we know that Dumbledore stands as the greatest opposition to what we will, eventually come to learn is just the greatest dark wizard in history. We learn from Hagrid that Dumbledore is considered to be the greatest headmaster Hogwarts has ever had, and that after Hagrid's expulsion, he ensured that Hagrid stayed on as gamekeeper. From his chocolate frog card, we learn that Dumbledore has actually already defeated another dark wizard, Grindelwald, and is a notable wizarding inventor and researcher, and is widely considered to just be the greatest wizard of modern times. Now, in the closing chapters of Philosopher's Stone, we learn that Dumbledore cares a great deal about Harry's well-being, being more worried that he was too late to actually save Harry than about the object that would potentially bring Voldemort back to full strength, and that he's been subtly guiding and assisting Harry throughout the school year. It's in his conversation with Harry where he really reveals his wisdom as they discuss death, the truth about the connection between Voldemort and Harry, and the relationship between Snape and Harry's father James. All of this serves to paint Dumbledore as something of a saint, a bastion of good upon which evil can take no root and is unable to topple. And for the first few books, this is exactly how the character of Dumbledore is portrayed. Always standing firm against evil and injustice, always willing to subtly nudge Harry onto the correct path whenever he's attempting to navigate the year's new mystery. And ultimately, he's a character that is both wise and incorruptible. However, from Goblet of Fire onwards, we begin to see flashes of the man known as the only wizard Voldemort ever feared. Whether that be in dealing with a Death Eater impersonating one of his friends and placing Harry directly into Voldemort's clutches, when his students are being manhandled by Umbridge, or in the aptly named chapter, The Only One He Ever Feared, where he squares off with Voldemort in the heart of the Ministry of Magic. It's in these moments we see that eccentric veneer just disappear, giving way to an intense and powerful wizard, usually filled with just this righteous fury. Despite this, his virtuous characteristics are continually ingrained, whether that be in his discussions on elf rights, his anger at the Dursleys' treatment of Harry, or the wisdom he displays in accepting his share of the blame for Sirius Black's death. From Goblet of Fire to Half-Blood Prince, we, the audience, come to see Dumbledore as Harry does, as a bedrock of safety and kindness and wisdom, whose might can match that of the greatest of dark forces thrown at him. And so when he dies, as all mentors in the hero's journey must eventually do, to make way for the hero to, truly come into their own, we, like Harry and the rest of the characters, lose the safety and the certainty that he provided. But if the first 6 books ensured that we would see Dumbledore as saint-like, holy, if you will, then Deathly Hallows serves to tear down this impossible ideal of a person he represents and just plant him firmly in the mud with the rest of us humans. Dumbledore had flaws. Big ones. Flaws so earth-shattering to the characters in the story that we, the readers, are forced to try and reconcile the paragon we've known for 6 books with the man who lusted after power, who sought to enslave the non-magical community that he saw as just inferior, and was seduced by the dark arts in such dramatic fashion that he is more than just partially responsible for the death of his own sister. We must reconcile the fact that the man who cared so much for Harry and his safety, who admits that all of his plans for defeating Voldemort were nearly undone because he just cared so much, was raising Harry like a pig for slaughter, right up until the ending of Goblet of Fire, when he realized Harry might have a way to survive. He is merciless to Snape, a man who's attempting, and granted failing, but that'll be a separate video, to achieve redemption, and callously treats the people around him like pieces on a board in a grand game against Voldemort, all in the name of the greater good. See, it's in that very phrase, "for the greater good," that we find Dumbledore acting as something of a mirror to dark wizards like Grindelwald and Voldemort, in that he's willing to do whatever he deems necessary in order to achieve victory. For the greater good is just, it's critical to Dumbledore's character, and essentially marks the chapter of Dumbledore's life where he lusted after power with Grindelwald in search of the Deathly Hallows. Now, this relationship with Grindelwald had a massive impact on Dumbledore, and is responsible for his shying away from any position of power for the rest of his life, believing that he can't be trusted with true power over others. This ties in so beautifully as to why he considers Harry to be so special and strong of character. Harry never sought power or leadership. Instead, he had it thrust upon him and did his best to not only wield it responsibly, but also just try and lead some semblance of a normal, average life. Further, just adding layers of complexities to Dumbledore's character and his relationship with Harry. I mean, it's Deathly Hallows that created such a schism for readers when they think of Dumbledore, that many still see the actions he took as unforgivable. Leaving Harry at the Dursleys year after year is looked at in a new light, as we, as readers, ask ourselves whether Harry truly had to endure so much pain at their hands, or if there couldn't have been a better way of safeguarding him, or at least just alleviating some of Harry's pain. His slow and aggravating doling out of information to Harry is now seen as frustrating, and perpetuates an idea that he just didn't trust Harry enough to truly confide in him, and he placed the greater good above Harry's own well-being. His role in Sirius's death is looked at with disdain, and his treatment of Harry is believed to be cruelty of just the highest order. See, Deathly Hallows cements Dumbledore as an endearing, yet deeply complex and just fascinating character. He's a man who learnt from the mistakes of his youth, who faced tragedy after tragedy, some of which was of his own making. But he gained wisdom and clarity from these experiences. He isn't a saint or a paragon, but he's striving to be as good a man as possible, and not to fall into the same mistakes he's made before. It's incredible character writing, chronicling Dumbledore's journey from youthful ambition to just hard-earned wisdom, elevating him beyond the typical saintly mentor archetype. Now, while I don't think he deserves the vilification by the fandom that he's endured in recent years, there's no denying that beneath that wisdom lies a dark, complicated, and honestly just morally grey side to the greatest wizard of all time. Now that we've had kind of a thorough look at the character of Dumbledore as he is in the books, it's time to look at the man who first gave him life, and why he is widely regarded as the greatest actor to portray Albus Dumbledore. Richard Harris was initially hesitant to take on the role of Dumbledore, only being convinced after his granddaughter, I think it's Ella, should have looked that up before I did this, told him she'd never speak to him again if he didn't take the part. But like with most of the cast of the Harry Potter films, Richard Harris was an inspired interpretation of Dumbledore, bringing a sense of warmth and eccentricity to the role that was so crucial during those first two books. He looked the part of Dumbledore, and he brought forward just his wisest and kindest characteristics, and fit the role of archetypical saintly mentor just perfectly. I think that the strict adherence of those first two movies to the books is probably a large reason why fans of Harry Potter still maintain that Harris was the perfect Dumbledore. I mean, in Chamber of Secrets, Harris's Dumbledore reassures Harry that he was meant to be in Gryffindor, you know, highlighting how it's ultimately just one's choices that shape who they are. This scene is an excellent example of how Harris's presence captures the wisdom and venerability inherent in Dumbledore's character. Harris's Dumbledore embodies the kind and wise mentor Rowling wrote in the first few books, and he brings just a gravitas to the character that makes audiences stop and take note of everything he says. Harris's slow and deliberate cadence infused the audience with an aura of safety and stability that Dumbledore in the books provided to all of the characters around him, while emanating this inner strength that perfectly matched that of his book counterpart. Now, while Harris brought a warmth and wisdom to Dumbledore that really resonated deeply with audiences, his age and the limitations of those first two films also meant that certain aspects of the character remained underexplored. The greatest weakness of Richard Harris's Dumbledore is that he felt like a man just well past his prime. More of a figurehead than somebody who could stand toe-to-toe with the dark forces of the world. Now, of course, this was mostly due to Harris's age. The man was 71 years old when he filmed Philosopher's Stone. But, you know, this wasn't really an issue for the first two movies, as Dumbledore was kind of just filling the role of the wizened old mentor, guiding the hero upon his journey. But I can't imagine Harris's Dumbledore fighting Voldemort in the Ministry of Magic with the same power, grace, and agility that the role demanded. It's a problematic weakness of Harris's portrayal, as the Dumbledore of the books is still a very active and dynamic character, despite his age. Especially in high-stress moments, the Dumbledore of the books just exudes power and intimidation. A feeling that Harris's Dumbledore just fails to capture. And, you know, while this may have been a constraint of the books he took part in adapting, I really struggle to see a world where Harris is able to bring that kind of dynamism to the role that the later books require. See, Harris also fails to bring an edge to the character the later books would require. Now, granted, I haven't actually seen Richard Harris in other roles that might showcase a broader range of the complexity that I'm talking about. I wonder if his portrayal would have actually been capable of capturing that morally grey aspects that the later books kind of require. But ultimately, Harris embodied the character uniquely and beautifully, complementing the stories he was featured in before his untimely passing. However, his age would have posed challenges in bringing Dumbledore to life as envisioned in the later books. Despite these limitations, Richard Harris's interpretation remains a cornerstone of the franchise, illustrating just the warmth and wisdom that defines Dumbledore, while setting a high standard for future portrayals. Now, after Richard Harris's untimely death, many wondered who could fill the void he left behind. The role was actually initially offered to Ian McKellen, who turned it down due to feeling it would be kind of disrespectful, as Richard Harris had apparently never liked him. Plus, he'd already played Gandalf and Magneto, you know. Ultimately, the role went to Michael Gambon, a choice that continues to divide fans to this day, owing not only to how he characterized Dumbledore, but also due to just his blanket refusal to read the books in preparation for the role. But, you know, despite these issues, Gambon's Dumbledore has a vigor and intensity befitting the most powerful wizard of the age. He's fully believable as a wizard of immense power, and his presence gives an understanding as to why Voldemort would fear this man over any other. This power and presence is perfectly illustrated when Dumbledore summons a ring of fire to chase off the Inferi attacking him and Harry. And these are traits Richard Harris just failed to capture. Gambon's vitality in the role was due to him being 10 years younger than Harris when he initially took on the role in Prisoner of Azkaban. Gambon was also able to perfectly capture the morally grey nature of the character as he schemed behind the scenes and worked to thwart Voldemort and prepare Harry for his upcoming trials. I mean, a great example of this is when Dumbledore agrees to use Harry as bait in the Tri-Wizard tournament, at Snape's suggestion, mind you, in order to try and understand just what Voldemort's plan actually is. His duel with Voldemort in the Ministry of Magic to save Harry was a perfect example of the vitality he brought to the character, as well as just the nuance he brought to the role. This duel is easily one of the greatest depictions of a wizard duel ever put to screen. And I mean, it perfectly illustrates just what it looks like when the two most powerful wizards of the age face off in a duel. I mean, the scene after his duel with Voldemort where he just kneels, pleading with Harry to remember how he and Voldemort differ, is actually a fucking masterclass in infusing depth into the smallest of scenes. You know? But despite all of his powers, and having just held off the darkest wizard of all time, Gambon's Dumbledore is powerless as Voldemort possesses Harry. And Gambon infuses Dumbledore with the sense of world weariness, desperation, and the smallest glimmer of hope that truly brings the complex nature of the character out in force. Gambon's Dumbledore is a man who seems tired. Not in the way Harris might have due to his age, but due to a world weariness just born of fighting against the tide of evil for so long. I've no problem believing that this incarnation of Dumbledore might have lusted after power in his youth, and believes in, utilitarian action characterized entirely by the greater good. His last scene as Dumbledore in the Deathly Hallows proves that he also could have brought the eccentric, kind, and warm Dumbledore to the forefront, as he finally explains everything to Harry and then bids him farewell. Unfortunately, that Harris-like warmth and kindness is not present throughout the vast majority of Gambon's portrayal of Dumbledore. That much maligned scene where Dumbledore paces at Harry full tilt, shoves him up against the wall of the trophy room, and just shouts at Harry, demanding to know if he put his name in the Goblet of Fire.
I protest! Harry, you put your name in the Goblet of Fire. No, sir.
Shows that Gambon's characterization of the character was just far more volatile and emotional than Harris's Dumbledore, and especially the Dumbledore presented throughout the books. The consequence of this decision is that Gambon's Dumbledore struggles to really embody the bastion of good and the paragon-like nature that Dumbledore exudes in the first 6 books, and especially in Harris's portrayal. This kind of serves to undercut the tearing down of that paragon nature that occurs in the 7th book, leaving most audiences wondering why the characters were so surprised to see Dumbledore's flaws revealed, when Gambon's Dumbledore felt like he had a tendency to wear his flaws on his sleeve, you know? Gambon's Dumbledore is also far less whimsical and light-hearted than the Dumbledore of the books. He's more of a commanding general than a man who enjoys the simple pleasures of whimsical suites and chamber music. This gives Gambon's interpretation the air of a man too concerned with the big picture to really pay attention to the small worries and struggles that people are going through, that the Dumbledore of the books would consider just of vital importance. Worries such as the treatment of house elves, getting the wrong flavour of Bertie Bott's beans, and reassuring a young Ginny Weasley that everything will be alright after she's possessed by Voldemort. All of these seem painfully out of this Dumbledore's wheelhouse, and in failing to capture the warmth and safety-providing feeling of the Dumbledore from the books, and indeed from Harris's portrayal, Dumbledore's dark past and moral flexibility, at least when it comes to Harry, don't really deliver that same gut punch as they do in the books, as viewers never really feel like they've had the rug pulled out from under them. We're instead just kind of left nodding our heads saying, yeah, that makes sense. Dumbledore was always a bit of an ass. Now, in spite of the flaws in Gambon's portrayal of the saintly mentor, his Dumbledore perfectly matched the darkening tone of the movies, which called for a more active and morally grey Dumbledore. It's just a pity that this wasn't balanced out by the warmth, wisdom, and just kindness present in both the book and Richard Harris's portrayal. While many fans of the books are often turned off by Michael Gambon's performance as Albus Dumbledore, I believe he was exactly what the series needed after it was left reeling from the tragedy of Richard Harris's passing. See, Harris's portrayal perfectly captured the warm, whimsical mentor of the earlier films that they really required. He established a sense of safety and wisdom for both characters and audiences alike. But as the story's tone darkened and Dumbledore's flaws came to the forefront, Gambon's portrayal introduced the necessary complexity and intensity to the character. His interpretation allowed viewers to see the formidable side of Dumbledore that Voldemort always feared, and the moral ambiguity that lay beneath his wisdom. And although, Gambon's approach may have alienated some fans due to its, call it early intensity, shall we, it ultimately aligned with the series' evolving narrative, Harris provided that essential foundation for the character. But Gambon's willingness to kind of explore the darker facets of Dumbledore's personality enabled the films to fully realize the complexities of J.K. Rowling's vision. Unfortunately, it just wasn't really at the same time. Man, good luck to whoever they end up casting as Dumbledore. Like, he's gonna need it.